Hello and welcome to episode 34, Space Technology Interest of Island Nations. Today's topic is not so much well known in the industry as well as to a lot of people outside of the industry as well. Because we have always seen that island nations have always been concentrated either for resource exploration or in a matter of politics, I would say, for resource exploitation. But it is the first time that we are discussing this topic from much more from a civil perspective, the commercial perspective, where how the space industry is helping these island nations, as well as how the interest of this island nation is going in the space technology domain. To discuss this topic in much more detail, we have today with us Marçal Sanmartí. Hi, Marcel. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Omkar. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you very much for giving us your precious time. And this is your second time on the podcast. Your first episode was great as well, because you were one of the first speakers to speak in detail about the Indo-Pacific issue. And I'm really glad to have you on the podcast again. So yeah, welcome back again.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Yes, yes. So yeah, without any delay, I would like to directly jump into the topic. We have seen a lot of developments recently happening. We have also seen some conferences which have been taking place related to the island nations. I mean, satellite connectivity for island nations. So, can you tell us how are island nations leveraging space technology to monitor and address climate change and its impact on their coastal areas?
Yeah, first, I would like to highlight how important is the issue for the island nations, because when we're talking about climate change, it's a matter of survival for some of those nations. Countries such as Vanuatu, Tuvalu, the Solomon Islands, or even Samoa could completely disappear because of the sea rises and climate change. So that is why it's crucial for them to monitor climate change. And like in the past you could measure the temperature of the ocean, but right now satellite imagery is basic to do that and see how the sea levels have like extraordinary growths or not. So to monitor that and have plans to mitigate those effects, it's vital for those nations.
Yes. I believe, as you mentioned about this thing, so can you share some examples of how small island nations are also utilizing satellite technology for disaster management and response? Like you mentioned about climate change as well, and I believe a lot of these things in some way are also related to disaster management response. So can you please extend it a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think the best example we might have it in Tonga. I do not know if you remember that something like a year ago we had a
Yes.
massive volcano eruption in Tonga. Um, and several challenges come out of that. First, that it's like you need to rescue people, and satellite images were crucial there.
Yes.
Also, there's an issue of internet connectivity. Most of the times, or several times, island nations are connected by huge submarine cables. But when you've got events such as volcanoes or earthquakes, those cables can break down. So, a year ago, we had both the United Nations and Starlink, Elon Musk company, teaming up, like reconnecting Tonga to the world, and that was
Yes.
vital. And there are some other technologies that in the future might be extremely useful for island nations. I do not know if you are aware that recently, I think it was Caltech was able to send solar energy from space to Earth for the very first time.
Yes.
Um, that's an issue that maybe people are not that aware, but because you might think like, well, island nations might not have issues obtaining energy through solar panels. But again, if you've got an event like a volcano or a typhoon, those panels can be, uh, like can disappear literally. They can be completely covered in ashes, or, like a tornado can take them away. So, sometimes you've got island nations spending like a huge chunk of their GDP just buying diesel fuel. So, like having a satellite just beaming energy to your island nations would be a huge game changer.
Yes. Yes. And I think from the respect, as you mentioned, space technology. So I believe especially when it comes to the communication factor. It is very important that the infrastructure should be strong. So from that perspective, can you tell us what primary challenge do island nations face when it comes to developing and maintaining their satellite infrastructure, or even, in general, I would say, space technology infrastructure?
Yeah. So we mentioned before all of those weather events, but also please have in mind that island nations are quite small, and like the island nation that has the bigger population is Fiji, and that comes with around 1 million people living there. But the rest of them might be populated by just a few thousand people. To to sustain um, the satellite infrastructure that, for example, they're using right now for a tertiary education. In here we've got something called we've got the University of the South Pacific, and it has like more than 12 campuses. So like to have satellite dishes to connect all of those campuses is absolutely vital to provide tertiary education. But also, like, you can find startups like not startups, like companies like Pacific Broadband Satellite Group, that they provide online access to like high schools in Samoa. So like to be able to find some sort of funding and public collaboration through the UN to keep that infrastructure is vital for these island nations.
Interesting. You mentioned about Pacific Broadband. I believe that is one such company which started launching, I believe, small geo satellites. I mean, but they were specifically the first ones to target the remote regions in Asia Pacific. And they
Yes.
have been so much successful. I mean, I have seen them grow from, as you know, as a small company to a, kind of an enterprise, where they have been, given several awards also now for their contribution to the civil society.
Yes, that's
Because no
why at
other
the
company,
beginning,
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
why
yeah,
at the
please
beginning I
proceed.
said startup, and then I
Yes,
corrected that. It's not a startup any longer. It's a
yeah,
well-established company. But also, like, Pacific has helped, like, for other startups to emit. For example, like in Papua New Guinea, you've got now a uh, a startup that is like expanding Wi-Fi broadband using solar panels, but using their satellite network from Pacific. So it's like
yes.
it's some sort of snowball when you've got an important player that helps other players to appear and grow.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely. You're right, absolutely right on this point. And just to kind of add a little bit on this, I would like to tell the people, because our lot of audience is not only from space industry, but it's also from the defense and security sector. So the space law is based on the laws of sea. And
Definitely.
yeah, because the reason this is one of the prime reason is because space is a vast pool of resources, similar to how the aquatic life is, the marine resources are. I mean, it's a extension of a massive resources pool, I would say. And
Mm.
from that perspective, I'd like to, kind of ask Marcel about in what ways is space technology helping these remote regions, or even, the islands, with marine conservation and sustainable management of their ocean resources. I would say specifically, please feel free to kind of highlight, applications of Earth observation as well in this.
Yeah. Actually, as we know, like, fishery is one of the uh, main sources here in the South Pacific, and like
Yes.
to be able to monitor those fishing banks, but also people who are illegally fishing. Because those are limited resources and precious resources. So like to keep an eye on those maritime domains, it's vital, and that's why you need satellite imagery. For example, like in the case of New Zealand, it's not exactly what we've got in mind when we think of a South Pacific island nation, but still, we are a South Pacific island nation. We've got a huge amount of millions of kilometers to keep an eye on, and like satellite, without satellite technology, that's almost impossible. So yeah, I totally agree that like the laws of the sea and the laws of space uh, well, merge because
Yeah.
they are the same. And I think that's the
Yes.
perfect occasion to mention something, and that's just like in the ocean, you need to register your boat, right? And
Yes.
you need the flag of a country. You need to do exactly the same with satellites, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Um, so quite interestingly, for example, like some Chinese companies have used in the recent past flags of convenience, and they've been using flags of convenience from island nations in the South Pacific, like Tonga. And so like it's quite interesting because then it comes other issues like liability issues. It's like you need to register your satellite and the flag,
Yes.
but that the levels of liability can drastically change from one country to another. And as we know, like open ocean, like
Yeah.
the open space, can be a place where things happen, and those
Yes.
liability issues are can take us to dark places, I would say. I don't know
Yes.
what
Yes.
your take there.
Yeah, well, no, I absolutely agree, and I'm really glad you brought up this in the conversation because we were just hovering around island nations' utilization of space technology for them. But this is one good issue as well. Because of this, the relations of the island nation is also disrupted. A lot of countries
Mm,
are, in the storm of politics as well because of this. Uh, we might observe, the similar thing in the space as well when we are possibly a much more advanced civilization. A piracy might be happening. We see a similar thing with the kind of, I would say, ocean resources at the moment.
mm,
Uh, it's not only to kind of exploit resources from the marine bodies, but primarily even to transport terrestrial goods as well. There is a
mm,
lot of smuggling that happence. So in a
definitely.
way, there is a company called as ISI, uh, not ISIS, but ICEYE, which is
Hmm.
Finland's one of the first companies in Finland based whose works on like the satellite domain, primarily focused on synthetic aperture radar, and they have done some significant work in providing services to the companies who are trying to track the illegal fishing and activities in the maritime domain.
Mm,
And I believe these things need to grow, especially in Asian region, because I believe the piracy and all these things uh, happen a lot in the Indo-Pacific region
mm,
because first thing is, at least because of Pacific, there are some now islands which are well connected, but earlier there was not even a connection, so there was
no, no.
not even a way to track these illegal activities, even for the government. And because of this, even these nations are at loss, because what happens is that when the smuggling or trafficking happens, these people take the goods at a much lower cost from these island nations and then smuggle it to
Mm,
other somewhere else. Now, when the government can keep track because of the communication infrastructure which is erected by companies like Pacific Broadband, then there is a possibility that these island nations might not be even at loss. So like this is a kind of chain reaction that happens. You don't see the top level advantage of space technology, but down at the downside, you can see in this way that
mm,
if the governments are able to track, if these island nation governments are able to track this illegal smuggling and shipping, they can actually save a lot of operational costs as well in the downstream.
mm.
So in this way, I believe, I mean, like we can definitely create a separate episode on this, I believe, where we can talk, because there is a lot to speak about. It's not only this, there is a lot of human trafficking as well that happens through the maritime routes, actually.
Mm,
But there have been not so much like efforts that have been taken by the governments, especially in the South Asian region, I would say. But
mm.
hopefully there might be.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we talk about satellite technology or even the cislunar economy, I think people are not very aware of what that entitles. And I think that's an excellent way to explain how come that satellite technology is like a growing snowball, because there are lots of applications that usually people are not really aware of. And I'm quite glad that you mentioned like trafficking and even like espionage at some point, because there's another issue that
Yes.
might come to light in the near future. I do not know if you're aware that most of the objects that we've got in the sky, like they end up buried in the South Pacific. The bigger ones, for example, do you remember the Mir, that in space station that the Soviets had? And
Yes.
that they were supposed to destroy back in the 2000s. Well, we've got that here in the South Pacific. It's a place called Point Nemo that is 22 million square kilometers, and there are already like something like 200 Soviet objects buried there under the sea. I do not know if you remember either that some time ago, Jeff Bezos went under the sea in the Atlantic, trying to rescue some old, um, I think it was Apollo, uh, mm,
Yes.
yeah, piece of technology, but like
Yeah.
just as a collector. But as we see, technological rivalry is on the rise between not just the United States and China. I mean, the main reason that China is not part of the International Space Station is because like the US did not want China to have access to certain technologies. But if you keep decommissioning things that you can bring them in at Point Nemo down in the South Pacific, at some point you might have people having a look there trying to rescue
Exactly.
technology. And the best example is the ISS as well. Like the International Space Station is going to be decommissioned
Yes.
soonish, I would say, something like in the 2030s,
Yes.
and that's going to end up in Point Nemo as well. Um,
Yeah.
so like someone will have to keep an eye on those waters and the activity that goes there. This is just another example of what you're saying. Like there's a huge range of issues that relate to satellite technology that usually people are not aware of.
Yes. Yes. No, this is a very important thing. Even I was actually not aware about this thing in a
Okay.
extended manner. Yeah. Because uh, I would say like my primary area of research is military satellite communications, but
Mm.
you really brought this unique point as we are discussing about island nations and the marine resources as well. Uh, like I had never thought actually, what exactly happens when the debris come down. I should think like it's useless basically. But as you mentioned,
Mm.
there are some nations, there are some adversary groups who are trying to take advantage of it.
Mm.
And yeah, this is a good piece of information. I mean, it's like, nothing is a waste. Everything can be recycled or at least can be reused in a terms of knowledge or information.
Mm.
So I believe
Yeah.
space debris serve that kind of information to the people.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely that can provide that. And but also we've got other issues that, for example, light pollution in the South Pacific. Here we've got that Niue is the very first like dark sky sanctuary nation. That means that you've got a extremely clear dark sky in countries like Niue, and that's great for observation. Of a space observation. But if you've got
Yes.
Starlink satellites reflecting light from their solar panels, that's a huge issue that's happening in New Zealand as well.
Yes. Yes.
But then again, it comes to liability. Like, how do you complain? How do you do something about it? It's like you might have a resource. It's like in space observation tourism, and all of a sudden you've got satellites destroying that economic asset for you. And as we know,
Yes.
like island nations. Um, they've got
Yes. Yes.
very few ways of receiving that income. Sometimes they,
Yes.
they
Yes.
sell their internet domain. Sometimes they, they sell their
Yeah.
satellite spots as flags of convenience. But that's
Orbital
another thing that
slot.
we need
Yeah.
to keep in mind.
Yes. Yes.
Like polluting their dark skies might be a huge impact for some of those tiny economies.
Yes, yes. And, just to kind of add on this, so are there any notable space-related education initiatives in island nations and that are, fostering local talent and expertise? Because I believe a lot of things that you just mentioned also requires an education awareness.
Mm. So yeah, we mentioned before the University of the South Pacific, and then we mentioned that Samoa is using satellite technology, but we've got also a very interesting. I would say it's it's not a company nor a think tank, but it's like it's called Space Based. It's based here in New Zealand, and actually they created some sort of a research competition on methane emissions. It's like New Zealand has together with the US has created a project called
Yeah.
Methane Sat. So basically, they detect methane emissions in the South Pacific, and that's vital for climate change. Like methane is changing our planet, and you can see that in this competition, you've got several, not just universities or startups joining this competition that is called, I've got that here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a methane sat competition, but also, like high schools. So like high schools are learning
Yes.
how to use satellite imagery to find solutions to very real problems. And that's just one example that is happening here in New Zealand.
Yes. Yes. That's a great insight, I would say. I mean, like space education related awareness is something that a lot of nations need, not only island nations, because as we believe a lot of new players are coming in, they really need to have this from the university level, of course, and kind of just to take a step ahead from the education to the economic aspect. So, can you
Mm.
discuss the economic benefits that island nations derive from their investment in space technology, including satellite-based applications for the environment, infrastructure development, tourism, especially as well? Because I believe island nations are extremely famous for luxury tourism, especially.
Mm. So of course, like if you got a resort, and I myself I've been to one of those, you need to have it's like good broadband, even if it's just to tell your friends that you're there and make them envious.
Yeah.
Um, but also when you've got a resort, you need a certain infrastructure, including medical infrastructure, and it's like telemedicine is part of that. So it's like if you're isolated in an island, and when we're talking about these island nations, like we're talking about thousands of kilometers between them. Like the distance between, for example, New Zealand and Niue, which is a
Yes.
country that is part of the realm of New Zealand. It's 2,000 kilometers, and like
Yeah.
you just got a few thousand people that live in Niue, something like 2,000. So like to have telemedicine,
Yes.
it's very important. Like of
Yeah.
course you can have some sort of technicians that they can help you with certain things, and even registered nurses, but for some other things that can happen to you while being in one of those islands, not just for the native population first and foremost, but like to all of those visitors, is to have some sort of uh, assistance when it comes to things happening when you're on holiday. So yeah, that's
Yes. Yes.
another of the things that satellites are providing.
Interesting. And I believe like we are now reaching the end part of the podcast. So just to kind of ask you in broader terms, I would say, I mean, this is of course a little bit futuristic too, but
Mm.
with respect to the future prospects, do island nations have in terms of space exploration and satellite technology any kind of interest in exploring at a kind of a vast level, both in upstream space technology? Would they like to invest in that? And what are some emerging trends in this field that you believe that island nations should be aware of?
Mm. Um, there's a very interesting thing, and that actually, it's like island nations are made of very good navigators. Even when we think about New Zealand, like the indigenous population of New Zealand, the Maori, it's like we've got theories that say that they come originally from nowadays Taiwan. Look, so and they've got a very good knowledge on how they got from very far away and how they navigated all of those issues. So
Yes.
that's part of their national identity, that they are very
Yes.
well skilled navigators. For
Navigators. Yeah.
example, yeah. So recently they discovered that first people arriving to Antarctica
Yes.
were South Pacific navigators, and they arrived there in the year 800. So that's more than 1,000 years ago that you've got humans reaching Antarctica using technology that nowadays we might seem very limited, but that means that they had an amazing astronomical knowledge. Like they know how
Yes.
to navigate through stars, and we are seeing here in New Zealand a bit of a revival of using that traditional astronomical knowledge. For example, like we've got Matariki as an official holiday in New Zealand, and that's the Maori New Year, and it's all about stars and and understanding how they're affecting us. So I
Yes.
can see that that's a path that it's like these all of these Polynesian and Melanesian nations could follow to become more and more curious about astronomy first, and then space exploration later on. So yeah, I would say
Yes.
that that's one of the things that in the future we might see.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. That's a good perspective. I believe we can definitely, one part on the space exploration ambitions of island nations, and one on the how to counter illegal activities in sea using satellite technology. These two topics can be a different podcast episodes, because I mean, the as much as we speak about them is less, because uh, first thing is like not much has been explored on both these topics, and
Mhm.
whatever is available is very in a limited terms. But I believe like individuals like you, who are kind of exploring these things passionately, we can definitely create a few more episodes on these two topics for sure.
Actually,
And yeah,
that's a topic that I'm very interested. For example, like back in 2014, Fiji was key to the Indian mission to Mars. And I've
yes,
been trying
yes,
to do a bit of research on that, but unfortunately, I haven't been that successful. But if I am, happy to
yeah,
come back to your show and explain you about my
definitely,
findings.
definitely, anytime, anytime. And so Marcel, just to kind of close off, I always ask this question to the guest speakers. The last question, it is for students. I know last
Mm.
time also I asked you, but I would like to ask you again, because there might be some students who might be directly listening to this 34th episode of the podcast. So, what message would you like to give to the students, researchers, and other stakeholders who are willing to participate, engage, or even are trying to possibly enter the space industry?
You want me to say again the same thing, or you want me to give you a second thought?
You can give a combination of both, maybe. For
So
sure, as
yeah,
per your
um,
comfortability. Yeah.
sure thing. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
remember that the first time I just mentioned that please do not fall for just one single narrative, and I think you and I agreed on that, Omkar, that
Yes.
it's like um, a multipolar world is a reality, and that's a great thing, I would say. It's like
Yes.
I know that uh, English, having the English language as a lingua franca all around the world is great, but do not fall just for the Western world narrative on things, and that includes space exploration. But on the other side, now would add that also be open-minded that if you're curious about space technology or space exploration, open your mind to other fields like literature and culture. And because like fiction and reality keep fitting each other time after time. So if you want to know where we're going, I would recommend that it might be quite useful to read some science fiction, Chinese science fiction, Soviet science fiction, uh, together with like Indian science fiction or American science fiction.
Yes.
Like it's going to give you somehow a picture of what might happen in the future, because let's not forget that like Jeff Bezos sent Captain Kirk to space. Like he got the actor, and because like he's a huge fan of Star Trek since he was a child, and that fed his desire to like explore space. And same with Elon Musk, like he consumed science fiction since he was young, and then he ended up like trying to make some dreams
Yes.
a reality. So if we want to know where we might be heading or what those entrepreneurs have in mind, well, reading science fiction is a good way to go, or even
Yes.
watching some TV shows. So yeah, that would be another
Yes.
another thought that I would like to share.
Definitely. Yeah. I believe you mentioned it in a really good way. connecting the dots between different sectors is very important. And I believe
Definitely.
space industry is something like this only. We are multidisciplinary in a way.
Mm.
Like you and me, we both are from different backgrounds and we are in the industry now. So it's very important. So yeah, thank you very much again, Marcel, for providing some such good insights. And I believe there are some really good points that you brought up, and I hope to record few more episodes on those topics specifically again. So yeah, thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Omkar. It has been a pleasure.